Hi, can you all hear me? All right. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We ready? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at where we've been and where we're going. So let's take a look at the syllabus real quick. So I believe last time we met, we had gotten started on the first assignment, and I believe we got to work on the first on one of the halves of that assignment, getting to build the Canvas application. I'm not following exactly what the instructions are in the assignment. I took the approach of breaking out the smaller pieces of each one of the list of hyperlinks and the tables, individually, and then I went and combined them all together to build the bigger screens, right? So you don't have to follow that approach. I find it useful so that I can concentrate on each individual smaller piece as opposed to looking at the entire screen and trying to work with hundreds of lines of code as opposed to just a couple of dozen lines of code, right? And then combining it. Also, we discussed the fact that we're doing this all manually, right? We're copying and pasting a lot of the text back and forth from files onto other files, which is very error prone. It's very easy to just paste it in the wrong place. All that is going to go away when we get to JavaScript and React and all that, right? Which is going to allow us to apply an abstraction layer, right? We're going to be able to wrap these static HTML pieces of code, right, inside of a reusable modular function, right? That can be parameterized, and we can run code, and we can dynamically compute stuff, right? We don't have that just yet, so we have to do what we can with whatever we have so far. So yeah. Also, it's a little bit rough on the edges what we're doing so far because we only have HTML, and next week when we introduce CSS, we're going to be able to come back and paint it a little bit and give it a facelift and make it much more presentable. So yeah, so let's review what we accomplished last time. So we had broken the React application, the index.js. We comment that out because we're going to come back to React a little later, and instead focus on our public directory. Took a look at the entry point of the web application is this index.html. It's what gets loaded when we navigate to the root of the server, right? The root is this public directory, right? So it's the first slash and after the local host, right? And it's mapped to this physical file path. And since if you don't ask for any particular document, right, what you get is the index in that folder, right? And that's what we have here. So in the index, what we did is we created a couple of hyperlinks just to help the TAs navigate through your assignments, right? Also for them to quickly navigate to your Canvas implementation. Now yours might be slightly different, right? It might be in a slightly different folder. Your file names might be slightly different. So make sure to update it so that the TAs can navigate to the right location, right, in your website. So let's run it. We can say npm start. And when that boots up, right, this is the index file, right? It's an implied. It implies that that's the file that you want, right? And it's that set of hyperlinks that are implemented here, right? And these are the two labs, right? They're the lab 1 where you're going to do the first half of the assignment, right, which is due next Monday, which you should be at least somewhat done with that. Lab 2, which is we're going to work on next week, right? And the Canvas which I pointed it out to the starting point as the home screen. You might want to point it out to the profile, maybe. You know, it's up to you. Or the dashboard might be a good place as well. I don't have a dashboard. So yeah, so from here, once the TAs navigate here, they should be able to navigate everywhere else, right? They should be able to navigate to the profile, to the grades, the assignments. Yes, as long as you give them a good starting point for them to, you know, just verify that things are where they're working functionally as they should be. Again, they're not, you know, they're not going to go, you know, deep dive into your source code. They're more going to look at the functionality. Is the functionality what's being asked? If it's even better than what we asked for, that's even great, right? As long as you are able to navigate to all the different places that you can navigate to the, you know, to the assignments, right? The editor. Can you navigate to the grades? You know, can you navigate to the profile screen and whatnot, right? So that's what they look for, right? If some of you implemented it slightly different, like for instance, some of you did you know, you would your entry point was just this list, this initial list, and then as you clicked on one of these links, then the next sidebar appear, and then when you click on the third one, it would show then the third column. That's fine, right? That's a legitimate implementation, right? When we come back and we have a JavaScript, you know, we're going to have to you know, refactor that a little bit, right? Reuse whatever HTML we had implemented in the first assignment, so that we can repackage it, right, and reuse it in components and modules and whatnot, right? So yeah, so we worked on the grades, we worked on the assignments where we can edit an assignment, right? Well, edit, we can't really edit anything just yet. We can navigate to the home screen. One thing that I did want to discuss is in the implementation on the profile is right now the navigation that we've seen so far is navigations when we click on hyperlinks. Yes. There's a couple of implementations that we ask you to do that navigate when you click on a button, right? Which is slightly different, right? So let me just cover that real quick. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to take a look at the profile screen, right? Because the profile screen, you're being asked to navigate, you know, to the editor when you click on the edit button, right? And then come back when you click on the save button. Yes. So let's take a look at that really quick. So yeah, so on the profile screen, let's see, Canvas account, the profile screen here, right? It's oops, yeah, here it is. We also have the editor, right? And so under the profile, I'm going to create a folder for the profile editor, and I'll create a screen. And so this will be the profile editor. I'm not going to go into creating the, you know, the tables and all the hyperlinks, right? You can do that. Right? We've gone over that. We did it quite a few times in our previous lecture. So I'll let you finish that up. But I did want to cover the fact of navigating using forms, right? So here's the profile screen, and we should be able to navigate to the profile editor screen. Right, there it is, right? So how do we navigate between these two using forms, right? So the assignment asks you to do to implement the following. So in the profile screen, so it looks something like this. You have you know, you have some information about the currently logged in user, and you can click on the edit profile to navigate to the edit profile screen, right? So how do we do that? So let's create a button. So a button all by itself won't just navigate, right? So if you say here, you know, edit profile, right? And this is, you know, Alice Wonderland profile. So this is her profile, and she wants to edit her profile. So the button by itself doesn't do anything, right? But we want to configure it for it to navigate someplace. So what we're going to do for now, right? We'll come back to this and refactor this a little bit later when we get to React.js. But for now, right, what we can do is wrap this inside of a form, right? Actually, the proper thing to do when you have input fields and drop downs and calendars and whatnot, the proper thing is to actually put it inside of a form, right? The thing is that forms, when you add forms, they add the additional behavior that buttons now do a few things, right, inside of a form that they would not do if they're not inside of a form, right? What forms do, if you put a button inside of a form, the browser wants to submit that form, right? It's compelled to act, right? That you're filling out something, right? And it wants to grab whatever you filled out in that form and then submit it to something, to a server, right? And this is behavior that was fairly useful and fairly valid maybe a decade ago. Has fallen a little bit out of favor today. We don't directly submit to the information to a server. What we tend to do is first gather that information on the client, on the browser, validate it, see if there's anything amiss. We asked you for a number and you gave us a string, right? We do some validation, local validation. We do some highlighting that, hey, this is not right. We might do some cleaning up of the data before we ever submit it to the server, right? And forms, they kind of thwart that, right? They want to just submit without us first looking at it, okay? So we kind of are going to abandon this vestige, this quaint way of doing things. But for now, let's just look at that behavior. If you say action here, action allows you to point to where whatever data you have in this form, where should it be submitted to, okay? And we're going to use that mechanism to navigate to the edit profile screen, right? Typically, this would be pointing to some server where it would gather the information and then submit it to the server. But we don't have a server just yet, okay? We don't have a server just yet to send anything. So for now, we're going to reuse this behavior to just plain old just navigate, right? We want to navigate to the Canvas directory inside of account, inside of a profile, inside of the edit profile, and we want to go to the screen like that, right? So that when we click on profile, it wants to go to the Canvas. Did I misspell something? Edit profiles screen. Is that not the profile account Canvas? Canvas account profile. Oh, profile editor. Sorry, I got some dyslexia here. Profile editor. Okay, let's go back. Let's refresh. And let's click on that. And notice that now it navigates to the edit profile. Make sense? Right? Again, we're using a behavior that has fallen a little bit out of favor. It's okay. We'll come back and refactor this a little later when we get to JavaScript and React. So once you're in the profile, in the edit profile, you would presumably display some fields, right? Such as in the profile editor, you would display some fields like maybe an input field of type text that displays the name of the person that you are editing. Yes. Okay. Plus a few other fields, but I'm not going to get into all the other fields. So you have some text areas, a couple of input fields down here. So you all know how to do that already, right? We did that for the assignment editor, right? We did it for the grade screen. So you already know how to do this. So I'm not going to cover that. What I do want to see is, well, what about I want to navigate back, right, to the profile. So and again, when I click on a button. So again, we're going to use the same mechanism. Here we're going to create the button. The button is going to be save, right? And we're going to wrap this inside of a form. Okay, like that. And we're going to tell it that where we want to go, if this form is submitted, we want to go back to the profile screen, right? Which is inside of Canvas, account, and profile. and then the screen. Right, so if I refresh and I click on save, it navigates back to the profile screen. Make sense? Everybody good? Right. Now, one other thing to mention, notice this this question mark at the end. See that? Right. I didn't add that question mark. Okay. The form is adding that question mark for me. Okay. And the intent of the form was that it wanted to gather all the stuff that we were submitting, all the information that we filled out on the form. It wants to gather all that, right, and submit it to the server, right, so that the server can then process it, do something, store it in a database or whatever, right? We're not doing that, but it's worth discussing that a little bit. Now, what is it submitting? Well, for instance, it might submit the new name or my new the due date or whatever information I might have in this in this form, right? So let's add a few other things. Let's add a few other things. So, for instance, I might have a break. I might have a bio, like a text area for the bio. Followed the white rabbit down the hole. So if I click on the save, presumably it would gather all my input fields and submit it to, in this case, this screen. But notice that it's not gathering anything, and the way it gathers is by us giving names to these fields, right? So for instance, if I say this is the name, right? Name. So the attribute is called name, right? And the name of this field, I'm going to call it full name of the person. And this, I'm going to give it name bio, right? So what the form does is that it takes the names of the fields and the values of the fields, and it creates what is called a query string. It creates a query string. So if I save, notice that now the URL, see that at the end after the question mark, okay? It gathered the bio, right? Follow the white rabbit down the hole, and the full name, right? Equal Alice at Wonderland. See that, right? And notice that there's an ampersand in between the fields, right? So it creates a list of name value pairs that are formatted, just so you can see a little better, like this, right? So it has the name of the field, whatever name you chose, right? The actual value of the field, right? Replacing the spaces with pluses, okay? Then an ampersand to separate the fields. So if you have 3, 4 fields, there will be an ampersand in between, okay? And then the bio is, again, a whole bunch of spaces, 4 spaces. So I guess these 4 spaces right here, right? Plus the follow the white rabbit down the hole. You see that? So it grabs that, and also I think this is a new line character. So it grabs all that and submits it to a server. We don't have a server, but this would be one way that the client and the server could integrate, right? It could talk to one another, right? It could grab the form, pass it out to the server. The server would receive it, right? Would process it, do something, run some functions, store it to a database, blah, 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 blah. And then it would respond, right, with a success or failure or whatnot. Make sense? Right? So we'll come back to query strings a little later when we actually have a server and we actually can do something with that data. Right? Right now, there's nothing for us to do with that data just now. Right? Okay. For now, we're only using forms to just navigate, right, from one screen to the next. Everybody good? Okay. So one thing about forms, whenever we get to JavaScript and we get to React, right, we're gonna want to disable this default behavior. We're gonna want to stop forms from actually submitting, right? Because instead we want to use JavaScript to do some pre-processing of the data, look at the data that we're going to submit, maybe do some validation, maybe highlight a few things, right? And then if we're okay, then we're going to submit to the server. Yes. So we need to stop the forms from this native behavior, right? And the way we could do that is that we're going to change those buttons. By default, buttons instead of a form, they are interpreted as submit buttons, buttons that submit to the server, right, by default. And so to change that, don't do this now, but later we're going to disable this by saying that this is not a submit button. This is just it's a regular button, right? It does not submit the form. Okay. Right now we do want to we want it to submit, right? But later when we get to React.js, I know this is a source of errors and a lot of questions on Piazza. Says, why is this not working? And usually it says, oh, because in your form you have a button and it's submitting the form and it's reloading the screen, right? And it's resetting all your JavaScript files and all your JavaScript state, right? So just remember when we get back, way back when, right? To remember to disable the submission, right? And turn this off and say that these buttons are just regular buttons, they're not submit buttons, right? Now when you disable it, right, the submission doesn't work anymore. See that? Right. But for this assignment, we do want it to work. Just as a future comment, right? Let's see if I'll remember it. Now it works, right? I can go back and forth. Everybody good? Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah. Again, feel free to reuse the code that I've provided. If you find it useful, feel free to help you move along in the assignment. I do want to cover, how to submit this, how to publish it to a remote server, right? Netlify. You want this to make this available to the world. Right now, it's only running on my machine, right? So it's not publicly available to anyone, right? Unless somebody knows my IP address, right, and I make it publicly available to be able to hit my then yes, it will be publicly available. But usually I don't want have my machine running 24/7, hosting a server. So instead, we're gonna move this over to a remote server. Okay. So first, it needs to be in GitHub, and I believe we already submitted our source code to GitHub. Let's check. So let's see. We have Git branch. Okay, so we are on branch A1, and I think we have a couple of things in there. Okay, so we have some stuff in there. I'm going to commit all this to the A1 branch. Git add everything. Git commit A1. Okay, git status. So I'm clean. There's nothing else. And I think we have a remote that we added last time, didn't we? Okay, we do. We are pointing to this Git repository, and we can just push. We say git push. It'll push to the A1 branch, and we can navigate there. And indeed, we have two branches, right? We have the main branch and the A1 branch. Yes, and the A1 branch is the one that you would submit for your assignment. Yes, and these two branches. So what we want to do is we want to make all branches available remotely, right? In particular, branch A1 that has assignment 1, and then branch A2 next week that has assignment A2, right? So you can independently keep working on assignment 2 while the TAs are still grading assignment 1, right? So there's no issue of, as you keep working on assignment 2 on branch A2, you're not going to just overwrite anything on assignment 1, right? They're going to be able to just look at the source code, look at that running independently, each one in its own branch. Make sense? So let's see how that works. So here it is. And this is the source code, including the very latest stuff that we just introduced, right? So we should have in the profile, the profile editor, right? Here's our form, right? So there's everything that I just pushed, and exactly what I just worked on. Okay, so let's push this to a remote server. First, let's see what is the so there's the root. The root. Oh, it's not running. npm start again. So locally, once I'm happy the way it's behaving locally, I go to my root and this is what it shows me, right? I have access to the labs, I have access to Canvas. And once I'm happy with how it works, I can push it to a GitHub repository and then push it to a remote server such as Netlify. So let's head over to Netlify. So you'll need to create an account at Netlify. Let's log in, and it'll ask you if you want to add a Git repository, right? It'll ask you to authenticate to the Git repository. Once authenticated, you'll ask you for permissions. Okay, do I have the permission to push and pull and interact with the Git repository? You'll say yes, 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 right? And log into your Git repository, and then you can create a new site by importing it from an existing project, right? Which you can then select that where is your source code hosted, right? Where you have your source code. So we have it on GitHub, and I'm already connected to GitHub. From within, it'll ask me to re-authenticate, right? It logged in for me, and then I can search for the repository that we have pushed our source code to. So I think it has Canvas in the name. And I have a few versions of this for different sections. And I believe this is section 2. Is that right? It's this one. Yeah, it's that one. So it's this one, and we can go in there. It'll ask us a few things, the build command, and we can say deploy. Deploy. So what it'll do, we can follow along what it's doing, right? We can see the build here, right? It's working on it. It also notice that it's what the branch that it's deploying, right? Yes. Oh yeah, so that's what you would normally do locally on your machine if you want to build it, right? What it will do is that it'll so for instance, when we get to React.js, it uses a language that is a little bit too high level. It mixes JavaScript and HTML, and there's no, the browser doesn't know how to interpret that. So it compiles it down to the plain old HTML, plain old JavaScript, plain old CSS that browser do understand, right? So it compiles it. It really it's not compiling it, right? It doesn't become binary, and then it creates a build package, right? That is what get actually uploaded to a server. So you can do that manually, and so that's what it's doing. It's running npm run build to do that transformation, right, into the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, right? And that's what gets deployed. We can see the instructions, all the instructions that went through. It succeeded, and it picks out a random name for your website. If you do want this to be an actual name of your choice, you'll have to pay for the domain. But it comes up with a generic name for your website, right? And here it is. So here's our idyllic ganache, right? Some whatever hexadecimal number there. .netlify.app, right? And I think we just had the lab 1 there in our main branch. That's all we had in the main branch. And so, but what we want to do is that we want to have multiple branches deployed, right, with different assignments, so that TAs can work on assignment 1 while you're working forward on assignment 2. So let's look at that, right? So for that, in Netlify, you can configure. You can go to your configuration, and you go into your build and deploy, and if you scroll down, it says that right now the only branch that is being deployed, right, is whatever is in the main branch at GitHub. Yes, right. But I have more than one branch. I have main. I have A1. Next week we'll have A2, right? Then A3, and so on and so forth. And I want all of them to deploy separately. So you can click on configure, and you say instead of just using that particular branch, I want all of them to deploy, right? All of them to deploy. And what Netlify is going to do is that it's going to use the same URL, but to be able to distinguish between the branches, it's going to prepend the name of the branch in front of the URL, right? So that main is just going to be our this regular URL, but but branch one will be, you know, A1 dash dash blah 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 whatever. There's nothing there just now, not yet, right? But that's where we're going to be deploying our assignment one, and then next week it'll be, you know, A2, right, for assignment two, and so each one will have its own URL, so that, you know, you can work on the different branches independently, and TAs can grade them independently. Everybody good? All right. So to do that, right, we're going to say all. We're going to say save. We're also going to turn off continuous integration, right? So here in the build settings, it's doing npm build. This is what we would write locally, you know, just like npm start. We could run npm run build to create a local build. Usually, what the build command that they're using is a little stricter than ours. You know, it's looking for warnings. It's looking for you know, any unused variables. Like if you declare a variable and you don't use it, it'll fail the build. So it's pretty strict. So we're going to turn that off. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to say CI equal false. It says no continuous integration, right? Don't validate these kinds of things. So I'm going to save that. So once we're done that, we can. Right now we only have one branch deployed, A1. Let's go back to our deploys. Right now we only have that particular main branch deployed. Let's deploy now A1. So let's stop this, and we have branch. Okay, so we are on branch A1. Did we ever push it? We did push it, didn't we? Okay, so it's already pushed. So it won't kick off a push unless it sees a change, right? So let's make a really trivial change here, maybe even just one line of code. We're going to save that. Something pretty relevant. If we see get status, notice that there is a modification. We can add that. You know, trivial change to kick off a deploy on Netlify. All right, so now we're going to push. So it pushes it to A1. And here, notice that Netlify caught the change. Says, oh, there was a change in branch A1, that commit, right, that we just pushed, right? And it automatically kicks off the build, right? So we can take a look at the everything that's doing. This is what would happen if we're doing it locally on our machine. It's going to do a git clone. It's going to do a git clone of the branch. It's going to install all the libraries, you know, the React libraries, all the scripts, and you can just follow along. And it's useful to take a look at this log, right? Especially if you have an error, right? It says, "Oh, it's not deploying. What's going on?" Well, you know, make sure to look at that log so that you can you know, we can better help you. So it's done deploying. Okay, so there it is. So here's the branch deploy. If I click on that, it's going to go to that particular branch. There it is. See that A1 dash dash idyllic? So now there's something deployed there. Before there wasn't, right? So this is the code from branch A1. So now we have two different deploys, right? We have the main. This is what's in main. That it doesn't have any main, since it's the production branch, right? You know, it doesn't add the name of the branch in front of it, right? Because it's the root branch, right? So whereas this is A1, and from here we should be able to, you know, navigate to the canvas, right? And we have the grades, and we have the assignments, assignments. We have the account that we can, you know, edit and save. So everything that was running locally on our machine, now it's running remotely, right, on this publicly available URL. Everybody good? Right? Yes. Oh yeah, no, they're still all available simultaneously, right? But they're independent of each other. So anything that you do on A2 is not going to affect what you do on A1, right? And so that's the intention is that you can independently keep working on other assignments without affecting prior ones. But you can still modify them. Yeah, sure. Yes. Where what? I'm sorry. Oh, so it goes always to the root. By default, it's always go to the root, right? Is that what you mean? I'm not sure. Yeah. No, it's always goes to the default is that public is a map to the slash, right? And whatever index file you have in there, that's where it starts, right? You get one for by default, right? So in the in here under the public directory, this index file was already there, right? So this index file was already there. It used to just have this root ID, right? And that's where React.js was injecting the content, right? And so we broke that and we added our own navigation, right, to allow TAs to navigate to the various labs. So this is the root index, right, under the public directory. So the public directory is mapped to the root context, right? And you can ask it by name, index. So this index file is this index file, right? Is that index file, but by default, it's not required. It assumes that that's the file you want if you don't provide the name. Yes. Okay. So the two things that you need to submit on Monday, right, is this URL, right, so that TAs can go in and take a look at what you've been working on, right, and the GitHub where this lives, this GitHub, right here. You don't have to provide the branch because the branches are available here in this dropdown, right? So they'll know to go to the right branch, right, to take a look at your source code, right? So these two things we need, right? The this root URL for the GitHub repository, and this running remotely on Netlify. Okay. Yes. When they navigate to your URL, right, they'll see that they can navigate to the rest of the assignment. Right? So you should provide in that root index file, right, hyperlinks that allow the TAs to navigate to the different portions of the labs, Canvas, right? They shouldn't have to type, labs, A1, right, to navigate to a particular lab, right? You should provide those hyperlinks, right, for them to go directly in there. I mean, they could figure it out, right, by looking at your source code, right, saying, oh, under public, let's see, I need to go under labs, I need to go under A1, and that's when they would type that. So that would be very, very cumbersome and inconvenient. So please provide URLs for them to navigate anything that you want to be graded. Okay. It might happen. It always happens that there's one or two students that, right, they did the work, they didn't provide the hyperlinks, and the TAs, just didn't see the work that the student actually worked on, but just not accessible. There's no way to navigate to it, right? So yeah, don't be that person. Please provide hyperlinks to different places. Everybody good? We're still with me? All right, awesome. Okay, I do want to take a look at the project. It's never too early to start working on the project, right? Already you have some skills, right, that would allow you to start, exploring, okay, and prototyping, what it is that you might want to build. In particular, you might want to, take a look at what are the main screens that you might want, and try out different navigations between those screens, right? And just prototype it, okay, to see if it works, if you like it. Already in this assignment, you know how to do load images, right? Do some forms, and so just to have a rough tryout of what it might look like. So let's take a look at the requirements for the project. Again, I think these requirements are broad enough that you should, I think you should be able to build anything you want, but there are some minimum requirements that that you need to fulfill. Okay. So the intent of the assignment is for you to be able to create to choose a particular topic, right? Whether that's sports, food, or entertainment, or music, movies, events, stocks, whatever topic of interest of yours, and build a little social network around it, right? Where folks can log in and identify themselves. They have a profile screen, right, where they can look at their private information, and they can register themselves and create a new account, and come back later and log in and see their profile information, and also support any number of people, right, simultaneously logging in, interacting with their particular information that is related to them, right? So if I go to my profile, I can see the sports teams that I like, or the books that I like, or the movies that I hate, or whatever, right? Any information that is somehow related to that person should be available through the profile. People I follow, or people that follow me, any messages that I've sent, right? Or any articles that I've written, right? Or anything that somehow is related to the identity of the person who's currently logged in, should be available from the profile, right? So there should be some link or some ways of me navigating to, or I should be able to be visible here. Right? I can navigate to whatever is related to me as a person, when I identify myself, right? Now, there's also people that don't identify themselves, right? That they're folks that happen to come to your website, right, to your application, and they're anonymous. We don't know who they are, right? So there should be something for them to do, even if they don't identify themselves, right? So for instance, they might land at the home screen, right, and we don't know who they are, and so there should be, at the home screen, some content, right, that is for anonymous folks. Okay, I don't know who you are, but here's something interesting for you to consume. Now, if you are logged in and you come to the home screen, I can also provide something that is particular to you because I know who you are. Perhaps it could be the last few things that you've written, a new person who's following you, somebody who sent you a message, right? Anything that has happened in the last day or so, right? Or something random that might be relevant to you specifically, right? Because you like this movie, you might also like these other movies. Whatever, I don't know, right? But because I know who you are, I should provide something that is specific for you when I come to at the landing screen. Make sense? So it should be able to recognize whether you're logged in or not, whether you're anonymous, I don't know who you are, or I know who you are. Okay. Then from this home screen, it should allow me to either navigate and log in, so I can go to my profile, right? But if I'm not logged in, I should not be able to. I have no profile. I have no private information. I should be able to navigate to somebody's profile, right, and see some public information about somebody, right? And so we'll see that in a minute. So somehow, users might be able to navigate to somebody's public profile, right? And we'll see that in a minute. Now here from the home screen, I should be able to interact somehow with whatever topic of choice, right? And that data should mostly live in some third-party API that you do not control, right? So if it's about sports or food or movies or events, right? This is all data that already exists on the cloud, right? And there's tons of APIs out there, right, that allow you to access all tons of really cool information for free, right? So start, for whatever topic you choose, start investigating what APIs are out there. Okay, and so there should be a couple of screens that allow you to interact with this API that you do not control. For instance, two screens might be that one of them allows you to query something to this API, right? Maybe it's the title of a movie, right? Or it's a artist that you follow, or maybe is a particular team, right? That you're a fan of, right? Or maybe it's a location and it's events around your location, right? Or it's a particular book that just came out, okay? Right? So you should be able to provide some form here that allows you to ask for information about something, right? And that API should come back with some data representation based, results based on your search query. Yes. So if I'm looking for movies, I might type, I don't know, Batman, and it'll come back, showing me all the 300 movies and series and comic books that have something to do with Batman. Yes. And you can display this in any way you want. It could be in a grid, it could be a table, it could be a list, it could be, lots of images, right? However you want it, you're free to render it any way you want. But typically, this search results that comes back, it's in a summarized fashion, right? It'll have maybe a little thumbnail, right? It'll have maybe a small little title or a small summary of the results, right? And usually, in most cases, it will have some unique identifier, right? You'll have some unique identifier that the remote API uses to identify that item. If it's a song or an album or an artist, it'll have a unique identifier for that artist, for that album, for that song, for that whatever, or whatever book or ISBN or SKU for product, whatever. There'll be some unique identifier that is related to each item that you are rendering here. Yes? Okay. And also usually, the APIs will have at least two entry points. One that allows you to retrieve, a result set that meet your search criteria, and there'll also be another API that you can provide the unique identifier to ask for more information about a particular item. Okay. So, for instance, if I say Batman, this will come back as an array of movies. And each object will probably have the title of the movie, right? When it was published, when it came out, maybe the rating, right? R, PG or something. It'll have a thumbnail URL to an image of the poster for the movie, and it'll have the IMDb ID. How is it, the unique identifier in the IMDb, in the Internet Movie Database, right? Okay. And it'll have just like those 5 items. That's it. Right? Enough for you to, maybe draw like a grid of the movies, right? The title, okay? And with the ID, you can maybe click on a particular movie, use the ID to go out to the search to the database again, fetch more information about that movie, right? And then in a separate screen, you can retrieve that additional information and have like a detail screen where it'll come back with maybe the plot of the movie, right? Who the director was, the cast, right? Reviews from Rotten Tomatoes, right? It'll have even more images for posters, so it'll have a much bigger object for that particular item. Make sense, right? And then so in this detail screen, you can be more verbose about the information that comes back from the remote server. Yes? Everybody good? Okay. All right, so the data that renders here comes from the remote server. This data also comes from the remote server. Okay, so you haven't done anything, right? You're just a user interface interacting with some remote API that you don't control. You just know how it works, right? And you know what the type of data that's coming back, and you're rendering it. Okay. Well, what about locally? Well, as you interact, right? with the data, you can generate content as well. For instance, I'm looking at the movie, the particular Batman movie, and I can, maybe you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, where I want to be able to say that I like that movie, right? Or I hate that movie, or maybe I want to leave a comment or a review for that movie. Yes, right. So somewhere you need to store that information, right? You can't store it in the remote API. They typically, all those APIs are typically read only, right? Where you can only retrieve data, yes, for you to consume that data, and you render it in some kind of device, on a web application or a phone, tablet, whatever. But they're mostly usually just read only. So if you're going to like a movie, you're not going to be able to store it in the remote API. You're going to have to store it in your own database somewhere, right? In your own server, right? And that's where you're going to have this detail screen is going to have a merge. It's going to have a combination of information that comes from the remote server and some information that comes from your local server, from your local database. Like, for instance, if you like the movie, well, you're going to have to go out to your own API saying, hey, such and such person liked such and such movie, right? So it goes out to the server. You store this information, this relationship that Alice likes the Batman, right? And not just you, maybe Bob likes this movie too, and Charlie and Frank and Ed, right? And somebody left a review, right? And somebody hated it. So if anybody comes to this screen, not only are you showing information from the remote server, you're also showing that Alice liked it, and Bob liked it, and Frank hated it, and John left a review, right? That comes from where? It comes from your API, from your server, from your database. So this screen is a merge of some data that comes from the cloud and data that comes from your database. Yes, it's a merge of the two. Make sense? Everybody good? This one too could be a merge, right? If, for instance, if I get the movies that come back, you could have a thumb, a likes thumb right there on the results. Yes, and if you, the person who's logged in, previously liked that movie, you would have to render the thumbs up that you previously liked this movie, right? Without me going into the details. Okay, so this too could be a merge between those two information, right? Not required, but there's something to think about. Okay, so now the information that lives in your database, in your server, should have some identifiable information of who created that information, right? That Alice liked it, right? And Bob hated it, right? And Charlie left a review, right? So you can render them in such a way that those reviews, those likes, those hates, should allow you to, you should be able to see their username, maybe, right? Maybe their avatar, okay? And if you click on them, it should take you to their profile, right? I can now visit your profile, and I see that, ooh, look at all of these other reviews that you've written, all these other movies that you like, all these other books that you hate, right? And all these people that are following you, and people that you follow, and I should be able to, look at all your public information and see that, ooh, yeah, okay, you like all these other movies. Okay, so well, let me look at that movie. And I click on that movie, and it navigates back to the details screen where I can see that other movie that you like. And I can see the reviews from other people about this other movie. Yes? Make sense? So it's all interconnected, right? I can navigate back and forth. Now, all this has happened without me logging in, right? I've searched for Batman. I can see all the movies from Batman. I can see the details of a specific Batman movie. I'm navigating to Bob's profile. I haven't logged in. Right? I can see that person that follows you, that person that you follow. I can see that you also like Lord of the Rings. I go back to that movie, I can see the details without me having logged in, yes? Well, I only need to log in if I need to create content. If I'm just consuming content, I don't need to log in, yes? But if I'm going to create content, right? If I'm going to say that I like a movie or I hate a movie, or I'm going to leave out a review, right? That can only happen if you are actually logged in and I know who you are. If I don't know who you are, I cannot create the relationship that so-and-so likes something, right? Or is following someone else. I need to know who you are, right? So what you might do here is that if you're not logged in, right, I'm going to hide, the review box, right? I'm going to hide the thumbs up and thumbs down. I'm not going to show them to you, right, unless you're logged in, okay? Or I can maybe provide them, but if you click on it, right, I'll kick you out to the login screen, right? Because I don't know who you are. Make sense? Right. So most of everything is available to both anonymous and logged in users, right? But only logged in users can create content. Yes? Makes sense? Right. Also, these two profile screens, should be slightly different. If I'm navigating to somebody, if I am in my profile, I can see everything, right? I can see my telephone number, I can see my address, my everything that's private to me, right? I can edit my profile information, right? But if I'm navigating to somebody else's profile, there should be a smaller subset of things that I should be able to see. I should not be able to see your phone number. I shouldn't be able to see, your address or anything like that, right? So there should be some private details that are not available to anyone else, right? Other than myself, if I'm visiting my own profile. Make sense? So the profile screen should be smart enough to know whether this is your profile or you're looking at somebody else's profile. Yes? Okay. Now you're free to decide what is private and what is not private. There should be at least one thing that you see in your own profile that you cannot see when you're visiting somebody else, and you get to choose what that is, right? What's private or not. Okay. Also, when you're logged into your own profile, the URL, right, to navigate should be /profile with no identifiable user ID. Okay. That the state of knowing who's logged in lives on the server, securely on the server. The server knows who's logged in. Okay. It maintains state information, right, across multiple requests, right? But if you're visiting somebody else's profile, then yes, you are providing the identifiable person who you're visiting or looking at their public information. Yes. So there's a distinction between the two, and we'll get, when we get to servers and whatnot, you'll get to we'll see how to do that. Everybody okay? This was more or less a very high level set of screens. You can combine this if you want. Like if you want to combine these screens into one, that's fine, right? Maybe your home screen, includes the search screen, or if you want to combine search and details, maybe like a left-hand side, right-hand side, you're free to do that. We're looking for functionality, right? Not necessarily, this particular layout or navigation. You're free to do more or less what you want, right? Also, we're covering in the assignments. We're very strict on the framework that we're using. Right, we're using React in the front end. We're using Bootstrap, Node.js in the middle tier, and Mongo in the database. For the server, you're free to explore other frameworks. If you want to try out Vue.js for the front end instead of React, feel free to do that. If you want to use a Java server or Python or some other infrastructure for the middle tier, feel free to do that. And if you've taken a database course and you prefer to use MySQL or SQL Server for the database, feel free to do that as well. Right. So for the database, feel free to explore other infrastructures. Right. But for the assignments, we're strict on what particular technology we're covering. Right. And but feel free to try out other things for the project. Okay. A couple more things. Yeah, so most of what I just said is listed here on the requirements, right? For the profile, search, detail screen, login, registering, responsive design. So your project needs to be responsive, meaning TAs are going to take a look at your project from a large screen. They're going to go visit it also with their phones, right? And they're going to confirm that they can still use your project, right, from their phone. Okay, so make sure that you verify that your screens are still usable at all screen sizes, right? Laptop, an iPad or phone, right? White spacing, make sure that we're going to be learning about using CSS to add margins and padding, right? And color schemes. So make sure that it looks pretty, it looks polished, it looks finished, right? Consider it as a maybe a portfolio that you're putting together for potential employer, right? Consistency, contextual requirements. All right, so yeah, we are going to be using a single page application, right? User requirements. Okay, so you have to implement at least 2 types of users. You have to implement at least, well, 3. You have anonymous user, right? I don't know who you are, but then 2 identifiable different types of users. For instance, if you're implementing Canvas, then you would have a faculty and you would have a student, right? And even though they're using the same application, there are certain things that one user can do that the other one can't. Yes, right? And there's a whole bunch of things that are that overlap, right? They both can log in, they both have profiles, right? They both can do certain things that it's the same for both, and they both can interact with the same piece of data, but one of them might have read-write access to that data, whereas the other one could only have maybe read access. Yes, like I can create modules, I can delete modules, I can create links to slides. You can only, as a student, you can only read that information, right? And you only have read access to it. Yes, or you might have different capabilities over the same data type. Right? For instance, I can create a quiz, right? And you can also interact with the same piece of data, the quiz, by answering the questions. But you can't remove a question, right? You can't edit a question. You can answer a question. Yes. So there might be different use cases that are different for the same data type, right? For different users. Yes. So the requirement is that you have to have at least 2 types of users, and there should be things that one user can do that the other one can't, right? And sometimes they're complementary of each other. So here's just some examples, a seller and a buyer, right? Faculty and students. Okay, web services, database. Okay, the data that you're going to be storing in the database, right? So you should have at least, I think it's 2 domain objects, right? A domain object, what I mean by domain object is 2 objects, 2 things that you need to store in the database that is specific to the domain of choice, right? So if your topic is music, then something that you might want to store in the database is a song, yes, or an album, right? Those are objects that are specific to the domain of choice. Make sense? Right? If instead this is movie theaters, then a domain object might be a movie, right? Or a movie theater, right? So things that are specific to the domain of choice, right? So something that would not be useful anywhere else other than your domain. Make sense? And these are things that you might need to store in the database. So you have to have at least 2 domain objects of choice, right? Also, yeah, 2 domain objects. These are just, you don't have to implement a class diagram. You do not have to create a UML diagram. If it's useful to you to make sure that you have the domain objects and whatnot, that's fine. Uh, okay, so now once you have these domain objects, you need to also create some relationship between the data, right? So for instance, you need to create relationships between a user and another user. So for instance, a user follows another user. That's a relationship between two users, yes? Or a user sends a message to another user. That's also a relationship, right? Saying that, the sender of the message and the receiver of the message, yes? Right, so it's a relationship between two users. So at least one relationship between users, at least one relationship between a user and a domain object. Like for instance, a user likes a movie. Yes, that's a relationship between a user and a domain object. Yes, and then at least one relationship between domain objects. Right. So for instance, a song is inside of an album. Right. So an album has many songs. That's a relationship between a domain object album and a domain object song. Yes. Okay. So you have at least those three relationships between users and domain objects, and between domain objects. Make sense? Right. So those are the broad requirements of the project. Other than that, you can do whatever you want. Right. Keep it clean. Keep it PG-13. And that's it. Any questions? Yes. Oh yes, yeah. Programmable web went under. I'll need to update that. Yeah. But you can search it. You can search any on the web very easily from Google. About a particular topic, and you say API, right, and it'll come back with tons of options. Yeah. All right. Any questions? So we'll go over this as we go again. But you can get started right away. Right? You can create under public. You can start playing around with this, right? Creating a new folder and call it project, right? And start creating screens. A login screen, a registration screen, a profile screen, right? If if you choose a particular topic, how would you render a whole bunch of songs or albums or artists, right? The screen of an artist. This is, if I'm logged in as an artist, then what would I see? Right? If I'm logged in as a fan, what would I see? Right? If I'm logged in as a student, what would I see? Right? And so you can start already, practicing what that might look like and prototype it. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over some slides, make sure that I didn't forget anything. Creating HTTP nodes, we did that. Creating the React, we did that. Committing, deploying, we did that. Right. Okay. Then we went over HTML on the DOM, formatting web paragraphs, we did that. Lists and tables, web forms, navigating, we did anchors. Yep, we did iframes. Okay, we didn't do iframes. So iframes is an element. It's a tag that we haven't used, right? And what it allows you to do is it allows you to embed content, right? That entire websites, right, that are maintained by someone else, as a rectangle that renders on your own website, right, or your own page, and it allows you to, to just give the URL to some other website, declare a rectangle, and it renders that other website on your own website, right? And it's useful, for instance, if you want to embed a Wikipedia article, right, inside of your own website. Right? So you can say, point to a particular URL, right, and say, okay, well, I want a little rectangle of 300 by 400, and I want to render it in that. You can also embed videos, right? And this is actually the main way that YouTube allows you to embed their videos on your website. Right? If you go to YouTube and you say embed, it'll create an iframe tag, right? That you can just copy and just paste it on your own website, and you can say now you have an embedded video in there. It's also useful. Well, that's a little copy and paste from a YouTube video. Most other content, if you go to Google Slides or Google Docs or Google Sheets, right? They will all have a version of publishing content on the web, right? And sharing that content. And it'll create an iframe snippet that you can just copy and paste it on your own website, right? So for instance, we could enhance our own Canvas application that instead of just providing the hyperlink to the slides, it actually embeds that slide inside of the Canvas application. That'd be a nice improvement. Or instead of me just giving you a hyperlink to the recorded video of the lecture, right? Instead, I would embed the video right inside of the Canvas website, right? Also, you can also same thing. A Google Doc you can embed. It's pretty cool. Right? Other things that we didn't cover are being able to just draw stuff on the screen with vector graphics. That allows you to declare a canvas using the SVG tag, right? And you can specify a particular rectangle on the screen that you can then just draw all sorts of primitive shapes, right? You can do circles, rectangles, or just arbitrary polygons, right? Where you can put X, Y, Z positions, right? And it just draws lines around it. So these are just some really trivial examples, right, of drawing a line, drawing rectangles, drawing rectangles with rounded corners. So I'm not going to go into details. If you want to explore on that, there's plenty of documentation on SVG. Last year, a student created a small little drawing application, right, where you could drag and drop these boxes and change the colors and gradients, right? And it was pretty cool. You had like paint box, right? that allow you to generate all sorts of diagrams, right? So it's pretty cool. So if you want to explore on that, there's plenty of documentation online. All right, let's start talking about CSS. All right, so CSS. So what we're going to do in the CSS module is that we're going to revisit all the content that we've been looking at so far, right? And right now it looks pretty crappy, right? It looks very unpolished, so what we're going to do is that we're going to be able to come back and just paint it, right? And decide that we want certain things to look in a particular way, right? And the way it works is that we can declare whether a certain thing has a particular look and feel, right? So you can do it in a couple of ways. You can either do it directly on the element, like for instance, if you have a particular paragraph, right? You can override the default look and feel, right? Already, whenever you visit a website, like say our website, if you inspect it, you'll see that so somewhere somebody is telling this to be black on white, right? That it should be using that particular font, right? That it should be this big, right? And also take up the entire width of the screen, right? And push all the elements below it, right? And so that comes from the default style sheet. Notice that it says user agent style sheet. See that? So all browsers have a default style sheet, right, of how H1 should render, right? It should render with a display of block. The size of the font should be twice as big as everybody else, okay? That it should have certain margins above, below, right? At the beginning, at the end, right? That it had that, and that the font should be bolded, okay? So that comes from a default style sheet that all browsers implement, right? That's why if you render this same HTML document on Safari, Chrome, Firefox, it'll render exactly the same way. Okay. I can't edit this. I can't override this. I can't override it. Right? Now, notice that my editor does give me a way that I can add other things, right? Where I could override whatever the default user style sheet says, right? So I could say that instead of the font size being twice as big, I can change that and override it and say that the font size should be 3 times as big, right? And it increments right there and then, right? I can make it bigger and bigger, okay? Now, obviously, any changes that I make on my inspector here on the browser is not permanent, right? If I refresh the screen, the server is not running. Let me run the server. npm start. And there it is. So yeah, any changes that I do on my inspector are not permanent. Right? But it gives me a real quick and dirty way to just try out different style sheets, right? Or styles where the font size is 3 times as big as normal, right? That the font color, or just the color, sorry, if the color is red, right? And it changes right away, right? So I am overriding it. Now, if I refresh, obviously it reverts to the default style sheet, yes? Right? To make it permanent, I can do the following. I can go to the actual page where you have the actual code and do it right on the element. Right on the element, I can override its default style, right? By using this new language called CSS, or cascading style sheets. Okay? And I can do that by using the local attribute, right, of the element called style, where I can make the changes permanent. I can say that I do want my font size of this particular H1 element, right? I want it to be 3 times as big, and I want the color to be green, right? And now notice that it's permanent, right? If I refresh, it's always going to take that particular style. Everybody good? Right. Now, you can certainly use this strategy of updating individual tags, right, and overriding them using the style. That certainly works. But this is generally frowned upon, right? That you would deliberately add a style attribute right to the element. Right? A slightly better approach, not that much better, but slightly better, is to do it in the head, right? In the head, instead, we could grab the style, grab that, remove it from there, and it goes back to its original, and instead declare a style element in the head, right? And here's where you would copy your transformations, where the style was the font size you want to be 3em, and the color to be green. But now we have a problem. Before, we knew that the style was being applied to this H1 because it was declared right on the H1, right? Removing it from H1 and putting it up there, now we don't know what that transformation is for. Who is this for, right? So here we would need to just be a little more specific and say, oh, it's for that H1, right? For that H1 element. For that H1 element, I want this particular transformation, like that, right? And so I'm now reestablishing the relationship and saying, hey, that particular H1, well, I want the font size to be 3em and the color to be green. Everybody good? Right? So if I save that, I get back my transformation. Make sense? Yes. What? Yeah. So we moved it from the style attribute, right? We moved it to the style tag, right? And so this does have a name, right? So this is called a CSS rule, right? That has on the left side is called the selector. Right? It allows you to say, select the element whose name is h1. And on the right-hand side, we have the transformations. Right? We're saying that we want to override the default properties. In particular, we want to override the font size to be 3 times as big as opposed to the default two times as big. And we want to override the default being black. We want to override it to be green. So this is a rule, right? A CSS rule. And so this is slightly better. Yes. Different styles for what? You mean like inside H1, like inside here? So yeah, so this applies to anything inside H1, and anybody inside of H1 inherits all the stylings. You can override by going a little bit further and perhaps wrapping a particular piece of text, right, and then referring to that element specifically, right? We can do that in a minute. Yes. Yeah, I'll go there in a minute. But let me answer this one first, right? So, for instance, if you want to change web dev to be different, right? If we want it to be, I don't know, red, we could wrap it so that we can grab it. So we can grab just the web dev, right, and say that the span, that particular span element, the color to be different, red, right? So you can go and be further down and grab that particular element by its name. Okay. Now what you're saying is that, well, what happens if you have a whole bunch of H1s, right? Excellent question, right? So for instance, if you have another H1 down here, right, and this is project, right? For instance, you have the project where you're going to have a whole bunch of ULs for your project, right? Your users, domain objects, blah, 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 whatever, right? Notice that one rule of H1 applies to all H1s. See that, right? So it's like a pattern match, right? It pattern matches, right? This thing parses the entire document looking for every instance of H1, right? Painting them all to be green. Everybody good? Right? And maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's not what you want, right? And we'll see in a minute. How would you override that? Okay. So for instance, you might say, well, I don't want all my H1s to be red or green, right? How would I override that and say that only this specific H1 and that other specific H1, right? So for instance, one way to differentiate the H1s is that you might provide a unique identifier, right? You might say that this is a unique identifier of project, right? It's still referring to the H1s, yes. But now you can say, well, this is true for the H1 that for all H1s, but I can specify something different for the H1 whose ID is project, right? And I can give it a separate, a different transformation, right? We're saying, so this says this hash, right, is a abbreviation for ID. It says, I'm looking for this one says all H1s, but this one's more specific. I'm saying not all H1s, the one single H1 who has the unique identifier project, right? And we know that IDs are meant to be unique within the same HTML, yes? So this has to be the only H1 that's going to have blue, yes? Yeah, exactly. Very good. So excellent question. So for instance, project here is being changed to blue, but say I remove project, right? And now notice it's blue. See that? Because now we have a collision. We're saying there are two transformations that are competing now for the same element. One of them says that you should be green, and the other one says that you should be red, blue, right? One says green and blue. So which one wins? Well, basically, last one wins, right? Or the closest to the element wins. Whoever is closest to the element wins, right? So, for instance, if I change the order, right, then it's green again, right? Whoever's closest. That's why, right? If I go into H1 and I override here, and I say that the color is gold, right? I can't be any closer, right, than styling it right inside of the style element attribute inside of the element. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, let's talk about that. So, for instance, if I say here, I say project. If I say project, so these two are also, notice that I just said that this one will override anybody before it, but that one is more specific, right? It's saying this particular H1 is blue and no other. I'm not saying anything about any other H1, right? I'm saying something about this particular H1, and that's another way that we resolve conflicts, right? The more specific the rule is, the higher priority it has over the element. So in this case, right, it is blue, even though this one comes later. Even though this comes later, it's not overriding the other one because this is too general. This says all the H1s are green, right? So that's a very generic rule, and it's competing with this very specific rule, right? So these rules compete amongst each other in who's closest to the element, and also which one is more specific, right? And the more specific wins over other criteria. Yes. Yes. Right, because I'm not saying, because this one is not saying anything about the size, the size. Right, but not the color. Right. But if I put the size here, right, to be 1, then it takes over because of the ID. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So ideally, you first start with the most generic first, right? And usually it's because you might be using a library that already gives you some default base behavior, right? And then you have your own styles, right, that override the things that you don't like, right? And we're going to exercise that, right? For instance, when we load Bootstrap, we're going to load that first, right? And then we're going to load our own style sheets that are going to override certain things that, for instance, we don't like the rounded corners, right? So we just remove the rounded corners for going forward, right? We don't like the just quite right the color scheme that Bootstrap defines for the buttons, right? And so we override the buttons for going forward. So it's not like you should totally avoid overrides, right? It actually, you can use that as a design mechanism, right? Where you define a base behavior, right? First, right? And then you subsequently can add something more specific to a particular page or particular element, right? Or particular tag. Okay. Yeah. And we're gonna make use of that when we take a look at Bootstrap. Okay. So again, this behavior of using style right on the element is frowned upon, and the reason is that if I have dozens of screens that have H1 with a particular style, if ever I want to make a change, right, because our screen looks a little bit dated, and when I want to do a marketing relaunch of my website, and I want to make it look prettier and whatnot, I would have to visit every single H1 element that has this style, right? And edit the style on each one of those H1s, because I want maybe consistency across my website, right? All my H1s are going to look, a particular way. Yes, right. So having to go in and edit, dozens of screens, it would be a pain in the butt, right? So moving it to the style here is only slightly marginally better, since now you can, not have to provide the same style for every single H1. Now at least I can put it here, and these rules apply to all the H1s in the single page. Yes, so it's slightly better, but this doesn't work if you are overriding me here at the style. Yes, right. So that's why this is considered to be a bad practice, because here you're forcing me to go into the H1. If I'm maintaining this website, you're forcing me to maintain every single element and the styles in each single element, and that's a maintenance nightmare. Okay, so this is a no. Don't ever do that. I mean, you can do it just for trying it out, and maybe in an academic setting, me explaining about it, right? But not if you're in a production team or anything like that. Don't do that. Again, this is slightly better, but still, it's also frowned upon, because this is only defined for this specific page, right? So it's great for the page, within the page, right, that you have a single place of maintenance here. But what if you have dozens of screens, right? You have, usually you have tons and tons of snippets of HTML that you're responsible for maintaining. So this is also a no-no. So the appropriate thing is to instead declare outside a dedicated file, like for instance, usually the same name as the file that you're styling. For instance, I want to style index.html. One naming convention is to create a separate file, right? That if it's styling that specific file, then it has the same name, right? So we can now grab this style from here, right, and remove the style here, and then here you can just declare those rules in a separate file like that. Everybody good? Right. So and now I can go back here and load that using link. I can say link and point out to the file index.css is styling this particular document. Everybody good? So if I go back and I refresh, notice that I have the same style, right? And now I can edit it outside, right? I can change this to purple, whatever, right? And it changes this 4, right? I can style it outside and bring it here. Now, so that's all and good if that's the style for that specific file, but oftentimes we'll have styles that go across an entire website, right? That is not only applicable to just this one screen, but it's applicable to dozens, hundreds of screens, right? So typically we'll have a separate file, perhaps called styles, just styles, that contains, right, all the styles that are shared amongst all screens, right? So this one has all the generic, very high level rules that apply to all screens, but then each screen might have, some styles that are only relevant to that particular screen, which usually would override, whatever the higher level. So this style might say that all H1 should be green, right? And but then your index might say that your H1 might override it to be gold, right? And so that in your index you would load both. You would load your style sheets, your style, right, and your index in that order, right? Where you first load things that are generic, that are true for all websites, for all your screens, but then things that you might override, that you don't like what the general styles say, right? And we're going to go a little further, and I guess next week we're going to have a style sheet that we're going to download from Bootstrap, right? That is going to set some default styling, right? That's going to make this look prettier, polished, responsive, right? And that it would just take us quite a while to implement that from from scratch, right? So we're going to do that next week. All right. All right. Everybody good? Right. Okay. I'm going to leave it here. Yeah. So I do have office hours on Wednesday, on Friday. So if you have any questions, reach out to me then. All right. It's on. I think it's 8 in the morning. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes.